Why do you think a mentorship program like this is so vital?
The thing about Hollywood is that there are no trans people. When you go and take meetings, anyone in any position of power, maybe they've got a trans assistant, anyone in any position of power is going to be treating you like you are not like them. And so I think that there's so much amazing queer mentorship that has been around for decades, but trans mentorship in film is something that we don't really have elders for yet, that we're really just figuring out how to be collectively supporting and lifting each other up. And so opportunities like this to meet other trans artists for me is just like a treat that makes me feel less lonely.
And when it comes to assembling your own crews and all the folks behind the camera, how do you go about sort of making sure that that's sort of as inclusive as possible?
I mean, you try your best, but the truth is that sometimes it's quite hard. The rules, especially when you get to a certain industrial level of production, like the rules of like who is allowed and isn't allowed to be a department head, who is and isn't in the union. I often find myself doing a lot of battle with structures that seem like they're set up to continue reinforcing existing demographics and power structures. And I think as a queer and trans artist, it's not only about figuring out what leadership looks like just with myself in that environment, but also figuring out how to both try to start shifting that dynamic without also marginalizing yourself within that power structure. It's a dance.
And what are your thoughts on where we are currently with trans storytelling, and where would you like to see things maybe progress, develop?
I don't think that it's. I think I hesitate to think of trans storytelling as like one thing, because all trans storytelling are trans people telling stories. And when I watch films by other trans filmmakers, there are things that I relate to deeply, but there can also be things where I'm just like, I never would have or could have made that movie. I think when we talk about trends in trans storytelling, it's still such a fledgling sort of movement. There just aren't that many voices, and there aren't that many voices being supported, that we really like don't have a big enough pool to like really understand where we are as trans storytellers. But we will, once more trans people start having access to be able to tell stories.
I've just read Corpses, Fools and Monsters. I saw you with a copy. Have you had a chance to read it yet? And if so, would you mind sharing your thoughts on it? Because it's a book I'd like to recommend.
Yeah, I loved Willow and Caden's book, Corpses, Fools and Monsters. They used to run this column called Body Talk on a blog together, where they would just sort of talk through sort of the trans canon, not just the canon of films made by trans people, but like trans images on film. And I remember reading them on body horror, reading them on old horror movies, reading them on Under the Skin, very early in my own transition, and understanding better like why I as an artist had been drawn to certain things through their sort of reads on it. So reading that book and seeing that become more of like a canonized critical perspective has been really, really amazing to see.
Yeah. What can we look forward from you next? Are you working on anything you can tell us about?
I'm trying to just make things. I'm a deeply creative person, and I try to be creative every day. I wrote a novel, my debut novel that I'm editing now with my editor. It should be out hopefully next year, and trying to get the next movie made. The next movie is a queer slasher film, sort of exploring the lineage of like the transsexual Buffalo Bill, Norman Bates monster on film, and it's a comedy, and there's a lot of sex in it.
And do we know the book title yet?
The book is called Public Access Afterworld.